if you're working at the newest tech companies, you will always be slightly one step behind when it comes to adopting new technologies. So dabbling with new projects is my way of being updated in new tech. So I chose this specific area actually because when I saw AI, I thought finally there is a way for maybe tech to become more accessible. Maybe one day seniors could just talk to machines or talk to their phones and everything will be done for them. Right? And I saw AI as a bridge towards that.
In a similar way, we teach design, and design thinking is a way to think about how to create something without data. And they said, why don't we just apply that mindset towards designing your life? And that birthed this thing called the Stanford Life Design Lab, which today still provides classes to students. That's why I feel, designing your life is very useful, because we can be more intentional. I think our government is wonderful for being able to try to pull investments in, trying to create jobs and all those things. But I think what's important is for people to know who they are.
Welcome back to another episode of Wise and Shine. I'm Dawn, SG Budget Babe, your host for today's episode, and I'm joined with Alex.
Thank you, and this is Alex Low. You can find me on socials, Alex Low, Growth Mindset Coach. Today, we are talking about careers, and I pride myself on having a very non-linear career, but I have two gentlemen here, or we have two gentlemen here today, that have also gone through quite a different career route, and very, very happy to welcome Mark as well as Jason on our show today.
So before we let our guests introduce themselves, what we'll be discussing and talking to them about really is how careers don't always move in a very straightforward path. A lot of time, I think, when we graduate from school, we think that whatever we study would then set the pace and path for the future. But in today's world, especially with AI and rapid change, the future of jobs will look very different from the one that we know of today. And on top of that, not to mention our own passions, our own interests, as well as our own skill sets and connections change as well. And that can very much determine and shift the path of our career trajectory. So we're going to invite Jason and Mark to share with us their story, and we hope that you'll find this episode insightful. Jason, could you introduce yourself to our audience so that they know who you are and what you do?
Hi there, I'm Jason, the founder of this little startup called Memory Lane. So we offer technology, AI technology to be specific to seniors to help them lead more independent and fulfilling lives. That is in a nutshell what I do. But I guess today I'm here to share a little bit more about my very non-linear career path as well. So later I'll share more. Maybe I can give Mark.
Well, my name is Mark. I'm the executive director and the co-founder of the Designing Your Life Institute. Many of you might be familiar with the book called Designing Your Life. It's an international bestseller. So I co-founded it with Professor Bill Burnett, who co-wrote the book and also started the Life Design Lab at Stanford. And in a nutshell, what we do is we basically bring in the Design Your Life program nationally to Singapore to enable everyone to have the tools to design a more meaningful and purposeful life.
Thank you, Mark. And I know you started...
And I also have a non-linear career.
Very non-linear career, yes. And I'm so happy to have both of you here today. And Mark, especially yourself, when you're talking about helping people design their life. Today's session is on career. So when you talk about designing your life, it is a combination of work as well as a combination of life. Is there a specific way that you help guide people towards that understanding in terms of designing your life?
Absolutely, that's what we do. I mean, a big part is we believe that we can give people design thinking tools or design skills and design mindsets to actually, they will be able to intentionally be able to design a more meaningful and purposeful life. There's so many facets to this, but one part is we do workshops and a number of exercises, but one of those things you mentioned is really helping people understand that life is more than just work. Life is a combination of, we all know it, kind of health, love/relationships, play, and also if you can understand and build your own personal compass about who you are with what you believe in, with what you do, right? These things really kind of connect into a human flourishing model. And other things would be, if you know your place of your compass, that guides your wayfinding. And wayfinding is very critical, especially in changing times, because that allows you to make decisions, ultimately to be able to connect into something that you like and you can be deeply engaged with. And we believe that leads to ultimately what we call vocational wayfinding, or maybe meaningful careers.
I like that term, wayfinding.
Yeah,
Right.
wayfinding. It's
Yeah.
very different from linear planning. Singapore's very good at linear planning. But as you know, the challenge with linear planning is that you can do that well if you have a lot of data. But as we all know in life, there isn't a lot of clear data,
Yes.
right? Things change. And in fact, we change and the world changes. And so when you take a very linear planning to us, it's very frustrating. Because as we know, right, life doesn't plan out that way.
Not to mention a lot of anxiety, because I think for a lot of people who come out of school and think this is my fixed path,
Yep.
I will follow this. And then when new technologies such as AI or even competition, globalization, localization, all these new waves hit the industries, they get very anxious, very worried about, oh, am I still going to have my job? How can I make sure that I am kept by my employer and not the first one out the door, that I am not being made redundant? And in a lot of these cases, even when we look back into history, I noticed that contrary to what people used to think. So there was this time when President Obama actually said that with the advent of ATMs, there would be less bank tellers.
Yep.
But I then realized later on when I dug deeper into the research, it actually led to an increase.
In bank tellers.
Yes.
Wow.
Because the technology made it easier for banks to also open up more bank branches, requiring less people. And the role of the bank teller then shifted from, of course, simply just handling cash to customer relationship management, to sales, to marketing, and a lot of different facets to that job. And those who were able to embrace those technology and new shifts in the role were able to command a higher pay. Those who did not adapt and could only still, oh, I'm very good at handling cash, I'm very fast. No, but that skill is not as necessary anymore. So they were the ones who then fell off the pay ladder, and they were earning lesser and lesser, while those that embraced the skills were going further and further. And I think in today's context, actually, there are some very strong trends that are quite pertinent, right, for career growth. I mean, Jason, you're a living example of that. You were in tech, you were in AI, and even your startup now is about using AI to tell those stories. Could you share with us a little bit more into what made you dive into this? Like, was it a very deliberate thinking, or I see this as a new trend, this is where the world will move towards and I want to go there? Or was it more purpose-driven? Or maybe perhaps a mix of both?
I think it's a mix of both. I think when I started, it was purely a project, a for fun project, right? It wasn't a project to commercialize. It wasn't a big startup idea. It was solely a project just to get my hands dirty with the newest technology. So I think back then, GPT-2, GPT-3 was out. And the technology back then was very new and very nascent. The performance was actually really bad, to be honest, compared to today's standard. I saw this opportunity as a way to force myself to keep updated on the newest technology, because even if you're working at the newest tech companies, you will always be slightly one step behind when it comes to adopting new technologies. So dabbling with new projects is my way of being updated on new tech. So I chose this specific area actually because when I saw AI, I thought finally there is a way for maybe tech to become more accessible. Maybe one day seniors could just talk to machines or talk to their phones and everything will be done for them, right? And I saw AI as a bridge towards that. So because of that, I saw AI as a means to accessibility, and that's why I explored this idea specifically.
Which is so interesting because just this morning on the right here, I was looking at this news infographic about the number one use case for AI, and specifically LLMS. And it said that in 2023 and 2024, the number one use case was generating ideas. But in 2025, it's moving more towards companionship. Jason, do you feel that is exactly, like, did you see this coming, or you felt like it's a very natural progression?
I think a bit of both. Definitely, I wouldn't say I predicted or foresaw everything that came. But as of now, it still feels in line with what I expected so far.
A lot of all of this has that design thinking element in it, right, Mark? But maybe for the benefit of our audience and listeners who are not so familiar with design thinking, are you able to give a brief introduction of what it is so that at least they get up to speed?
Maybe another way to understand it would be human-centered design. I mean, these are sort of similar fields, but essentially it's around being able to design an experience or a product or a service with a huge sense of empathy for how people feel about it, right? About the situation. So that's really about putting people in the center when you design a solution for. You would think that makes so much intuition, but the reality is that a lot of organizations don't do a lot of product development and a lot of these decision making just at the table without engaging with people. And the reality is that people and they wonder why they are not able to connect emotionally and they are not able to be sticky and all that. So really human-centered design, that's what it is. The other thing also about design thinking is taking a sort of almost approach where you're not just empathizing and understanding what people's needs are, but you're also designing in collaboration with other people from different disciplines, and also taking an attitude of prototyping and testing and trying and iterating rather than sort of just saying that, okay, I'm just going to produce this. So that's generally the approach towards what design thinking is. But, I'm sure you can find out more.
And the book was an international hit. What made you partner with the author and bring it to Singapore? What gap did you see in the local culture that you felt that could address?
So I used to work in the public service. I run Design Singapore. And that's when I actually met my co-founder, Bill. He is in his late 60s. For many years, used to run the design programs at Stanford, as in the undergraduate and graduate programs. But about 18, 19 years ago, him and another professor, they realized that their students actually didn't know what to do after they graduated. And as you all of us know, right, I mean, career coaching, or at least career counseling in my university or JC was not helpful at all.
It was not. Yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah, it really wasn't.
Right? But they realized actually it's because people need a certain attitude towards wayfinding. So they said, hey, in a similar way, when we teach design and design thinking is a way to think about how to create something without data. And they said, why don't we just apply that mindset towards designing your life? And that birthed this thing called the Stanford Life Design Lab, which today still provides classes to students, everything from freshmen, PhD, religious communities, masters, you name it. It started going around to about 600 universities, around over 575. But after that, they wrote a book that really kind of became an international bestseller. It's in 25 languages because it started to really resonate with people. So when I met Bill, I heard a lot about the program. I had a colleague who read the book and some other people had taken the class. So I said, I've been hearing a lot about this. Would you like to run it? I got him to run a program, COVID, and I rounded up people from across government agencies to career counseling in universities, and the response was phenomenal. And people were saying, what's next? And we started to see some really interesting data. In 2021, of course, during COVID, we were the number one worst and unhappiest workforce in the world. But the reality is, if you talk to a lot of people, people are also quite burnt out and people are quite tired as increasing disengagement. We also saw that we are a blue zone, so we live longer, you would know, right? So we've added 30 years to our life, but people don't know what they want to do with their lives. And then, of course, as you know, a student graduating in the workforce today, my goodness, entire industries might be sunsetting very quickly, and then new industries. So you really need a mindset to navigate. And so I went to Bill and I just said, would you consider, have you ever thought of driving a program nationally to change a country? And he said, I said, what will it take to change a country? And he said tipping points about 20%. So how big is your population? If you minus, if I just look at people with PRs and citizenship, there's only about 3.5 million. So you need about 700,000-800,000 people. Not impossible. So he says, let's give it a shot. And we started an institute 2 years ago.
Nice. And, Jason, so hearing what Mark has shared on the principles of design thinking, do you think that you unconsciously applied any of these in the different careers that you've had from pre-COVID all the way to starting Memory Lane?
Ironically, like the way I've approached life is actually quite similar to the main principles that's embodied in the book. And I actually got the book as a gift. When I saw the book, everything felt very intuitive. It felt like finally there's a framework, to shape how I thought about different things around. If I look back at my sort of very short or relatively short career, I started off in business school. At a point of time, I had this worldview that, I'm suitable for finance and finance is like for me. So I did a bunch of really fancy internships. But, 1 year in, I took time off school just to work in these internships. 1 year in, I got completely burned out. Wow. Right. And that worldview started to shift. Like, oh, what am I supposed to do next? Then at one point I thought maybe I could do academia, right? Because maybe, I could still keep my finance core and still go work for academia and do something. So I did a very nice research master's in Cambridge and really enjoyed myself, but decided, not really for me. So after that, back then I think tech was on the rise. Singapore was rising as a tech hub. Back then, there was a shortage of tech talent. So even without a tech degree, I could do some self-learning and get into the industry. So I started off like that, learned my way in and grew through. And slowly I became more technical, began working on more machine learning, AI projects back then. And then I started to work on more AI engineering roles and then finally started my own startup, learning a completely different set of skills as a startup founder.
Tell us about that first client that you got, like how was that feeling and what was the specific project that you won?
So I'm actually a terrible salesman, right? I'm a tech guy. So it's all part of this whole idea of reinventing myself. So I actually started this business with a co-founder. He was supposed to be the one doing all the sales and everything. I was supposed to be the tech and product guy. So of course things didn't work out and I ended up working on this mostly by myself at that point of time. So carrying, this little tech tool that I'm not quite sure is going to work. So I got a pilot with this company called St. Luke's Elder Care. So they're quite big. They have I think 12 active aging centers and maybe 18 or 20 daycare centers and a nursing home, even a hospital. So they're pretty big. So I went in there, tried to, did my best to pitch what this technology was about, my vision for it. Then I got a pilot from there, a paid pilot. So that felt pretty good because I was never actually an entrepreneur. I've never actually done things like, set out a lemonade stand, that analogy of entrepreneurship. Never done anything like that.
Trading your erasers in primary school.
Yeah, or like,
Sell comics.
or even cookie bake sale and stuff like that. Never done that, right? I've always believed that, you put in a certain unit of labor, you get a certain unit of outcome. That was kind of like my worldview. And that kind of process of entrepreneurship really opened my eyes to the possibilities of, hey, if you build something valuable, someone is willing to pay for it, right? So that was actually quite a nice and eye-opening experience for me.
Jason, so you were talking about how you started in business and you ended up being in a very different career. You went from business to being deeply technical. That is something that a lot of our listeners and audience who want to pivot into a brand new industry would be interested in. And even I myself, I am a writer. I've been very fascinated in tech. Mark, I was telling you I'm very fascinated with sustainability, but I can never see how I can get there. And for me, even about my own journey, which has been very non-linear as well, there were certain synergies in the sense that I studied writing and journalism and investigative journalism, for example. I ended up in an industry that had something to do with investigating in journalism. It used the same skills. I ended up in personal finance because the writing side of things, the storytelling side of things became very vital in finance in demystifying those technical concepts. So there was always a link. But to go from something to a completely different industry that is so technical, so deep dive. Can you describe a bit more about that transition and give some advice to people who are hoping to make the same pivot?
There are mainly two things when it comes to making a pivot. I think one is a spark and second is to find some kind of structure around sustaining this spark. When I say spark, I mean like what is the change in worldview that is moving you towards this new thing. Right. So in my case, maybe I thought tech was going to take over the world. It's going to be very, very relevant in the future. So that got me interested in learning. So back then, I think Coursera, edX, these new learning platforms was on the rise. So I could pretty much learn whatever I wanted for free. Right. So the spark is more about motivation. What actually would motivate someone to go start learning something? Then once you acquire a certain little set of skills, the next thing I would look for is structure. What would make you continue honing that set of skills? Because going from 70 or 80th percentile to an employable or even a master it takes extremely long because the curve is like a logarithmic curve, right? So your learning starts to plateau. You start to improve at a much lesser rate, and that's when a structure really helps. A structure where your performance is being measured, people around you are giving you feedback. So all that is going to help you become a master of that craft, such that you continue growing and continue learning, and your pivot becomes successful.
Did you actively seek mentors, who've been there, done that, or experts in these areas to speak to them and reach out to them for you to have a better understanding of that next thing thing that you were going to do?
So I would classify that as a structure as well, because once mentors or even managers or even teammates come in, right, they provide you that structure to give you that tiered improvement of your skill. So at least that is how I saw myself. Like whenever I make a change, that's how I improve, and that's why schools tend to work in the past, even though people argue that schools are getting increasingly non-useful. But I think school still provides that structure nevertheless.
And we look at structure in the context of Singapore. I think what the government is trying to design is that if you're young, you go to school, you do your internship, you acquire the skills in theory, then skills in practice, and then you go and get a job. If you're mid-career and you want to pivot, then you go for a WSQ or Skills Future funded course and maybe do some on-job training where they have given, subsidies to the employers who are willing to take these people in and give you a training allowance. And then after that, you convert from part-time to full-time and learn the rest on the job as you ease in, right? But Mark, based on your view, do you think this design and structure actually makes sense in Singapore's local context?
Because we're a small economy, we've always tried to plan everything, right? So it's a planned economy. We determine different basket of industries we want to get involved in, and we look for the supply needed. And I guess in the early days of building, that made a lot of sense, right? Like I need so many doctors, I need so many engineers, and then I will do that. And the premise was that if you went into those jobs as the country grew, you would also kind of prosper with it. But I think today, a lot of things are just up in the air. I think one, as you know, a lot of jobs would exist that we can come into. Even this job, this podcast thing, didn't exist.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So this view of you being able to plan your career for very specific professions, it's also not giving yourself the fullness of opportunity, right? Because there's so many other things. And the truth is that our children, like my daughter, I know that when she goes to school, the minute she enters school, and then by the time she graduates, a whole bunch of new jobs are created and a whole bunch of new jobs were erased. So you can't really take a pure planning approach. I feel then all the more you need to understand your why. You understand how were you made, right? If I listen to you just now, there's probably always a curiosity you have about people, about information, trying to be able to kind of break things down simply. So some of these things, if it's important to you, then how you apply that could vary in different seasons of your life, right? So I think then that why is important. So this whole idea of how you uniquely made. And then of course, your course might get you in your first job and all that. But as you know, who I was in my 20s, in my 30s, my 40s, I'm a different person. Right? We all right. Sometimes you want to learn new things. Sometimes certain seasons you want to be able to, you can't chiong so much, right? Because whatever, right? That's why I feel, designing your life is very useful because we can be more intentional. I think our government is wonderful for being able to try to pull investments in, trying to create jobs and all those things. But I think what's important is for people to know who they are. Because right now I'm talking to people in career counseling and things like that. And even people on the employee side, they realize that people are entering industries because they're told that these are growing industries. But sometimes they enter with no real personal sense of whether they have aptitude. And then you have a misfit. And usually when you're doing something that doesn't align with you, that's where you get burnt out.
Yeah.
And to be honest, and you look at the macro thing, the system has wasted resources on you because I've trained you for something that you shouldn't. And it's simply because you thought that I can have a safer job, I can be paid more. So I feel that we need that kind of clarity and then for people to find a way. And I feel that if you know your compass and you have an attitude of adaptability, to be honest, I think that's the most resilient strategy. Because as things change, you just adapt. You learn new things, right? There's the idea of like, oh no, why is the world moving on without me? That's not going to help you. I think all the more, if you look about people middle age, right? Let's say people in the 40s, 50s, I think there's a lot of job anxiety in the market because there's all these changes. But I think it helps a lot if you know who you are.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying Wise and Shine so far. I'm your host Reggie, aka your chief financial coconut, and for us to continue to do this show so that you become a tad bit wiser every week, you gotta like, share, subscribe, help us beat the algorithm. But even more importantly, if you can, comment in the comment section below. Let us know your thoughts and also some questions that you would love us to answer. Yep, now back to the show.
Whatever you said really resonated with me because I went to science stream in junior college. I took physics and computing because at that time my dad said, hey, I think computer science is the way to go. But I had no aptitude for computing and I totally failed that subject. I couldn't drop computing though, so I dropped physics instead, which I wasn't doing very well in. And then I went into arts in university and I realized that actually I'm an arts person. So I flourished with social sciences and everything. And I was like, oh my goodness, you know me, I have so many years that I'm behind in terms of readings and all that. And I loved be doing that. And entrepreneurship, of course, was the next thing that came along the way. And sports has always been something that I've been interested in. But yeah, I mean, would you then say, at which age would you then say would be a good age for a person, individual, to be acquiring these design thinking principles or skills? Because somehow I feel like, because I've been there, done that, and failed in these, it has made me more resilient and more adaptable to who I am today. If I had applied those theories or frameworks at a young age, then maybe I might not be as resilient and adaptable as I am today.
Well, I think there's some people who are more naturally wired a certain way. You could say entrepreneurs, not everyone's an entrepreneur, right? Because they have a certain aptitude for risk, certain, right? They just can't hold them down because, you know, they wouldn't just be in a kind of 9 to 5. For those who don't feel that that's their natural makeup, you can practice these skills. And you can practice these mindsets. It's practicing. Because you think about it, we always talk about this idea of creativity. Are some people more creative than others? The reality is that everyone has the same number of neurons. It's just that education systems have sometimes kind of taken that out of you. But creativity is just, you know, so you can actually train your brain to be more open to ideas. You can build what you call a risk immunity by helping people take small risks early so that they're braver to tackle bigger risks. So I believe these things can be trained. And it's just really the environment you put yourself into. So yes, the idea is yes, right? Rather than overnight, oh my God, you know, I think the issue is right now is that sometimes people have never sort of been a certain way, always sort of never challenge themselves out. And all of a sudden they hit a very big kind of life decision. You know, like, oh my God, do or die, right? I think that's a bit too scary.
So that intentionality of that
totally,
challenge,
right?
Yeah.
Right.
I'm getting a lot of like parenting ideas just from this. How to help my kid take small risks, how to design that so that they're more inclined to take the bigger ones.
And
right?
then, you know, also personal reflection, right? What are your values? What is meaningful work to you, right? So personal empathy is important, knowing what's out there. And then there's our attitude of prototyping and trying new things, being curious, talking to other people because they can bring new ideas to you, reframing. I think all these things can be practiced and it can be fun. You don't have to practice it in very high-risk context. Just do it with your kids. Just do it with the way you plan a holiday, whatever, right? Try new things.
And Jason, right, I think with all of this risk-taking and being intentional in challenges, I think that has definitely happened in your different shifts, right? But you talk very nonchalantly about it because it's like, as a matter of fact, yeah.
I have a startup.
Just share some of these challenges, right? Like, you know, that should I go left or go right? Those kind of decision-making and challenges so that our audience and listeners can also like get into your head a little bit.
On hindsight, the biggest risk is probably entrepreneurship, as many would have guessed, right? So I was actually kind of flourishing in my role in the tech industry, in big tech. I've worked several years in Meta in the UK. I came back to Singapore, worked at TikTok, was paid top dollar for my role, and I was getting good reviews. One thing to put all that behind is actually quite difficult, right? You're leaving an existing structure. You're leaving all this like identity behind. You know, you are so and so. You worked at so and so companies, and then you're leaving all of that behind to start anew for something that's completely unknown, right? And your identity is henceforth tied to this new thing that, right at that point of time, really didn't sound that impressive, to be honest, right? I was trying to convince people, like people were just like, what are you doing? You know, that decision was to me more of I think a bit of both a career decision as well as a life decision, right? Back then, I haven't had kids yet, still haven't had kids now. My wife was finally starting a stable career. She was doing a PhD for the longest time. She finally got a tenure position in the university. So for the first time in my life, I felt like I could take a big risk.
Right.
And I like, what's the downside, right? To me, if it's less about money, then I felt like I was well positioned to take that risk. My parents also didn't need my support. So, and I had a bunch of savings, from Meta stocks. So then I really sat down and asked myself, what do I really have to lose? Is it 1 year of pay, 2 years of pay, right? Then that's when the pull factor started to come in. I felt like in this new world of AI, when the economy will start to change very, very soon, back then it was 2023, I felt like whatever I was earning now I don't think I'll keep earning that in 5 years if I didn't grow, if I didn't change. I felt like my role would fundamentally shift, and all my colleagues would potentially be impacted in some way that I don't know at that point of time, right? So I wanted to do something proactive as well. So these two forces, I think, ultimately prompted me to, take the challenge, go into a more generalist role of a founder, and started to build my own way and forge my way forward.
Thank you for sharing that. I think very, very helpful for our listeners listening in.
And what I hear is a lot of proactiveness, which brings me to our last question for this episode, which is really all about, in today's context especially, so many people are worried that we might enter a recession, that AI will take away their jobs. In the last 2 years alone, we've seen so many firms, not just tech firms, eliminating tech roles, newsrooms even. I'm from the media, right? And I'm like, the newsrooms and magazines have completely shrunk, or some have been taken over, closed shop, eliminated. And we're seeing a lot of these roles disappear. The speed at which the new roles are coming up is still slower than the ones disappearing. So there's a lot of anxiety. Having known what you know now from the design principles and your life on hindsight, what advice would you give to people who are worried that AI will take away their jobs?
I mean, I think this anxiety is very real, right? I mean, it's sort of accelerated because of the ongoing concern for recession. But as you would know already, I think AI is going to change the job landscape very quickly. So I can empathize for people who are anxious, especially if you are maybe someone in the middle-aged who is a kind of sandwich, right? And already you kind of, there was already a sense that your job was not certain, and then now there's a kind of compounded sense that, could it come sooner than later? I would say then, if you are 50 and above, you can just take our program. We launched a program called Designing Your Life Next Chapter. It's free as long as you're a Singapore citizen or PR, sponsored by Workforce Singapore. But the point is, really, I think then all the more these mindsets are important, because you can't lean on the traditional career planning anymore. And it's really important then for you to understand who you are, your wayfinding, from which you can make choices. Other things, actually, we do this a wonderful exercise called Odyssey Plans, where we basically challenge people to think and design 3 radically different lives for themselves. That's preferable, right? Something that they desire, where work is part of the equation, but it's really helping them think through. And usually we do 3. The first one is that, the story you tell everyone if you were to continue on your same path today. But the second one was that if you lost your job tomorrow to AI, then what would you do? And then the third one, which is the wild card, is really if money wasn't an issue, or what people thought about you wasn't an issue, what you really do. What you really do. And if anything, it gives people permission to ask themselves, what would bring me joy, with the premise that in there is something that I can find deep engagement with and hopefully be good at. And if you can connect that to something that someone's willing to pay you for, eventually can build a career, there's a higher chance you probably do better than that and stay engaged than doing something just because you need to just survive. Other just quick tools around this to build a mindset of prototyping and trying new things. And that just means getting people to go out, things that they're curious about, talk to people. Volunteer a little bit of time. No one's asking you to quit your job, but sneak up on your future. And I think these attitudes are really important. And the last one is really to be able to kind of work and collaborate with others, because we do this wonderful module called networking, particularly useful in the universities, but I can see how that's useful also for people who are older. A lot of people realize, actually most people don't realize that most of the jobs out there are actually through informal networks. People send their CVs to all these places and they wonder why they get rejected. It's because they didn't have the right words, it didn't pass through the filter. But as you all know, I never applied for a job in my life. But I shared my story and I talked to people, and eventually someone said, you should talk to this person and all that. And that landed me, and then they liked me, and they say, even though you don't have all the skills, but you have some of it, the rest I think you can figure out. And that's how many. So I think even this idea of being able to tell your story, talk to people, that may actually lead you into places you never imagined. And I think all this is going to be particularly important, especially in time of anxiety.
Thank you, Mark.
Wonderful questions. I think that's very thought-provoking. Actually, if I could just add on one fourth question, you mentioned 3 key ones, right? I was just thinking on your third one and adding on. So if people were to do something whereby if money was not a problem and what would they just want to do and feel fulfilled doing, then maybe the last part to unlocking that would be like what Jason shared. How do you then monetize it? You can enjoy doing something. First, find what you enjoy. As you enjoy, you get better at it. And then the customer base could open up in the future. I remember when I first started, actually, there was no customers for what I was doing. Like, no one paid financial bloggers. There wasn't even a term. Literally, the term influencer was only invented in the last few years.
Not everyone lining up to pay for your service.
Yeah, but in the past, like only the lifestyle, the travel, the beauty ones. But by virtue of just keeping to it, and because I kept at it, because I enjoyed it,
Yep.
I got a bit better and everyone else will give up too soon. And then later on, the market shifted.
Yep.
The advertisers showed up. The demand started coming through. And I think also sometimes, when I was hearing both of you share your perspectives and stories, sometimes we're also fixated on the idea that what we want to do and be paid for has to happen in the now.
Yeah, absolutely.
But everything's a journey. The customers do not exist now. Like in Jason's case, they could come later on as a mindset shift. And that is really insightful in thinking, how can we design our life? Because instead of worrying about how AI could take over our jobs, Jason, you literally were in a job that will get displaced by AI or reduced, right? Maybe in the past you needed 10 AI folks to do this work. Now the AI can do half of that. So your entire team is now downsized to just 2 or 3. But you instead use AI to think of what deeper human need can be fulfilled with AI that was never met before. And now that it's getting cheaper and more affordable, what new consumer markets have been opened up as a result? I think most people wouldn't think of working with like the St. Luke's and the old folks home and elder care homes that you have actually reached out to, because sometimes the people in there, you wouldn't instinctively think of them as folks with money who are willing to spend. You would go to like the very private atas nursing homes with a lot of rich folks who are willing to pay for this technology. But because the cost has come down, these people all have the same innate human needs. And I love how you have actually used the technology to reach out to these people, which not everyone might be thinking about. It's very inspiring. What do you think, Alex?
I mean, I love the whole prototyping of design thinking and this scenario planning for the future. I think that's wonderful. That's great. Those are great strategies that everyone should go back and reflect and think about, right? So, Jason, what about yourself to address this question that Don has on AI for the future?
I don't think anyone can really predict the future, right? But I think if anything, looking back at my own very short career, I would maybe only land on 2 main advice for my past self at least. So number 1 is really don't be afraid to formulate some kind of worldview. Where do you yourself land in that worldview? I guess how I tend to think about it is, let's say, try to abstract yourself away from the situation, because we tend to get very emotional about own positions, financial situations, right? So if we manage to abstract ourselves out of it, looking at this person in this economy, what could this person do? How can this person best situate themselves in that new kind of like world? So questions to ask yourself could be something like, look at the job that you're doing now. Do you think, based on technology, do you think you need less of that? None of that, or more of that in the future? And that question alone can be quite telling already. And people always tell me that, when it comes to technology shift, either go high tech or high touch, right?
Yeah.
High tech means like, you become even more niche such that maybe even AI cannot touch you, right? Or high touch, like I look at a lot of the work that all our partners do in elder care. I don't think AI can ever really do that, right? That kind of high touch, personal human connection, or even things that require physical expertise. That's very, very difficult to displace. So those questions are questions I will ask myself when thinking about, the path forward. And the second major point I would kind of advise myself is to take action, right, after formulating a worldview. So the second part is very important, because just sitting there and thinking and worrying is not going to do anything. But taking action is more of like, talk to people, start learning, start thinking, and then start taking action on where your future career can lead you. I think these 2 combined are things that I would advise myself and maybe my future kids to do.
I think if you ask me how else could you spend your time, and it's kind of building on what you said, this idea of develop unpredictable skills. I mean, this idea of AI, AI is very good at predictable tasks based on historical data. But you think about the skills, human skills that we have, things that require creativity, ethical judgment, understanding kind of interpersonal nuances, navigating ambiguity. All these things are things that, humans do. And I think all the more my gut, like you said, right? These things will be hard to be replaced and will become probably more and more valued.
Yeah, I love that. I've learned a lot from this
Me too.
episode. Okay,
Yeah.
maybe we could wrap up one last word or our biggest takeaway from this. For me, I really enjoyed how both of you approach this whole philosophy of wayfinding and designing your life to deal with shifts that happen in the world. One similarity I can see is that you're not fixated, and you're willing to adapt. And Jason, it was a great reminder. Don't just worry, but take action. Otherwise, those worries will forever just remain worries and eat you up on the inside. So I thought that was a very good takeaway. And if you're listening to this episode, I hope that has given you some ideas on what you can do. What about you, Alex?
Well, I think everything that has been discussed today is very relevant to the anchor that I very much centered on, which is the growth mindset, right?
Yeah.
So that positivity, that optimism, that adaptability, and always learning from something that we might not have done well, or even if we did really well, we are learning from that and moving forward. So that definitely, plus the scenario planning and questioning, I think that's something that definitely I'm walking away with.
Well said, well said. So thank you all for tuning in, and we hope you found this episode insightful. If you've ever struggled to figure out what to do next with your career, if you're wondering whether AI will take away your job or if you'll be the next one on the layoff list, well, I hope this episode has helped given you some guidance as to what you can do to keep yourself competitive, less anxious, and wayfind your way to the future that belongs to you. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Dawn.
And my name is Alex. If you are not already on our email list, please head on to www.thefinancialcoconut.com. Leave your email there to be kept abreast and updated of episodes that we are launching on a weekly basis.
And that's all for today's episode of Wise and Shine. We'll see you here back on the next one. Bye.